what I oftentimes opt for is like on those days where we know that you're still a little bit under recovered, we have a few options. And I mean, like realistically, you can't just, summon the will to lift more weight. And if you try to expose yourself and like overshoot, it's more than likely that you're going to put yourself in an unfavorable position and potentially put yourself at risk for injury. So that, I would say, let's nix right out the gate, is like respecting that in order to make these decisions around auto-regulating and modifying your training, this is really going to come down to whether or not you can maintain proper positioning. So specifically the rib cage relative to the pelvis, when we're talking about these movements where there is a lot of pelvic stability that's required for you to, for you to stay in position, yes, but for you to make any kind of meaningful progress session to session, that's the link that ultimately is going to probably break down before you experience any kind of muscular failure relative to the glute. So with this, I'm like, okay, so you go into this session and like you're already down regulated. What I would do is go through your warm-up sets. And in this case, she's doing something like a B stance RDL. I'm like, go through your warm-up sets. And when you pick up that first weight, because a lot of my clients, myself included, we have that B stance RDL or we have that bilateral RDL. We have that at multiple points throughout the week. So there is a consistent and a very standardized way in which like they warm up. So for me, I'm going in, I'm picking up a 60 to do my first set. I'm going to do like 5, maybe 7 reps on the days where I feel a little bit more run down. The days where I'm like, ooh, like even if sleep was good, I just feel a little bit foggy like today. Probably going to go in and maybe spend a little bit more time on the warm up. So what does that mean? That first set where I pick up 60, on a day where I feel like everything's firing, maybe I'm only doing 5 reps just to, again, like stimulate, get the muscle actually activated, but also cue the correct positioning. Now, on a day where I feel like run down, I might be doing anywhere from 7 or 8 to 10 reps. And really the emphasis is making sure that I'm actually in the position that I need to be once I'm under a heavier load. I often find that on those days where I don't have it in me, even though I'm doing more reps on those days, I benefit from that. So I might add, like it's an arbitrary amount. So we're talking like an additional 3 to 5 reps in that first warm-up set. And then I go to my second warm-up set where realistically what I'm doing is I'm going anywhere between 80 and 90. Both gyms that I train at don't have 95s. So go fuck myself. I will probably use an 80. Now on a day that I feel really good, I would do like 3 to 5 reps, probably not 5 if I'm feeling really, really good. I'm only going to do 3 or 4. On a day where I'm feeling shit, I'll do 80. And this is really the last like exit on the highway where I can decide, okay, like, is this going to be my working weight or is this going to be my final warm-up set? And realistically, like when we came back from Texas, I found I was like, like we had 5 days off. We didn't sleep well. In that morning, even like we flew in. So it was like, okay, already up at like 3 a.m. Pacific. And we went to the gym, like 80 very much felt like my working weight. I was like, okay, 3 reps in, this is going to be hard to even do 10 reps while maintaining position. And that's really what I'm trying to stress here is like those warm-up sets on those days where you are down regulated, those are the barometer to really assess what you're going to use for your working weight. And it can be confusing because it's like, okay, well, you could be in a warm-up set and a few reps in be like, realistically, I'm going to hit RAR of 1 to 2 if I were to do 10 reps here. So now, even though I'm already in the set, this is now my working set. And I think this really is a more advanced concept within like the skill set of, I don't know, like training performance, like just training as a whole as an athlete. But it's something that a lot of people, they will get lost and be like, well, I already started this and this was supposed to be my warm up, but I don't think that I can reasonably go up. So should I just go back down? Should I do 60? And should I do that for more reps? And it's like, you can, but if you're already in, and this was like very specific, her question, she's like, I think she actually ended up just going back down to like 45 or 50. And she's like, yeah, I just did it for sets of like 25. And I'm like, that isn't what I'd recommend. Like, I get the thought behind it, and I'm like, I mean, maybe in some cases that would make sense, but the fact is, like, you're still going to be doing the same amount of working sets. And realistically, the fatigue, like specifically the fatigue on the lower back, and like you're going to be incurring a lot of systemic fatigue doing 3 sets of 20 to 25, because 45 pounds, 50 pounds, it is still a significant load. Whereas maybe you're realistically only able to get like 8 to 10 at 80, or even like 70. Maybe you stay at 60. Maybe you go into that second warm-up set of 80 and you're like, you know what, I did 3 here and there's no way I can even get to 8 reps while maintaining position. I'm just like, I'm kind of all over the place. My proprioception is just like really shit right now. Okay, well then maybe you go down, but you don't need to half the weight. Like, I mean, like going back down, I mean, that's understandable, but like being very cognizant of like the decision around how many reps are you then gonna do. This is another thing that a lot of people, they get lost within, the weeds of like, okay, how do I, instill a framework to make decisions within training sessions when I'm actually in them. And in this case, I'm like, okay, like if you are barely hitting the bottom end of the rep range, so it's something like a B stance RDL, if you're barely able to hit 10 reps, and like we're talking like maybe reps 7, 8, 9, they're happening, but they're kind of shitty. It's like, okay, I wouldn't use that same weight for the next set. I'd probably go down 5 pounds. I may even go down 10 pounds and be like, okay, let's do this not necessarily for 20 reps or 25 reps, but let's do this with the tempo. Let's make sure that we're maintaining that correct positioning all the way through. I think a lot of people, and this is something that I've seen across the board with like troubleshooting individuals training, is that they almost see like these target rep ranges, like 12 to 15 reps is like, okay, well, if I do these to completion, then that's good enough. As long as I just hit these reps, as long as they're done, it doesn't really matter how I accomplish them. And that's where you really miss the forest for the trees when it comes to improving the quality and like the technique of the movement. Because like, I mean, let's say in my case, like touching 120s for the first, or 120 for the first time, like that was a really hard set. And like looking back, I talked to Jordan afterwards and like, yeah, like I see I'm opening up with that back hip a little bit. So, I mean, realistically, even if I was like really fresh and like I could go back and touch 120 again, I mean, like I could do it. I could do it for, the same amount of reps, but it's probably more beneficial for me to go down to 110 or even 100 and make those like supreme, like just so pretty in terms of execution. And like I said at the beginning, a big part of like with using that kind of load for this kind of movement is that my center of mass is going to be challenged in a different kind of way because it's contralaterally loaded and it's a unilateral movement, but it still doesn't take away from the fact like the answer isn't just to continue going up or continuing to try to rip it if that technique is not there. So like realistically for me to be able to pull that with a technique that I would say is like green lighted or white lighted, if you want to get that technical, it's like I need to have more strength. I need to be stronger and I need to be exposed to maintaining that positioning when under such heavy load, which that's something that can be trained using 100 pounds, 110 pounds. And I put this out in my newsletter this past week, talking about like the adjustments I would make, like quite literally what I would do coming off of, a heavy travel week or a travel weekend where, where you were gone multiple days, you were probably not training, but just systemically you are run down. And I walked through, and it really came from working through this issue with a client. I'm like, this is exactly what I want you to do. I want you to audit as you go through those warm-up sets. And like for a movement that's a little more externally braced, like let's say a leg press, that process of actually auditing, that might not take as long and you might have a little more leeway because it's not going to be as systemically fatiguing. But when we're talking about compound movements, inherently there's a cost. And really the decision-making process that I go through is with each of these, like, am I going to be better by doing the same weight, by doing more weight, by doing the intended reps that I already plan to do? Because most of my workouts, I already have that target rep range just set in stone. Like that's the rep range which I need to work in. Or would I be better by potentially going up? And is there a drawback by going up on the reps? So something like, let's say, a kickback or abductions, like you can pretty much run that up until your nose bleeds. Quoting Eric Bagera here. But with something like a squat, even something like split squat, walking lunge, dumbbell step up, it's like the stability is what's being, the stability, let me rephrase that. The stability is your bigger constraint, specifically when we're talking about any kind of staggered stance or any kind of contralaterally loaded split squat. Now, when we're talking about someone who's already down regulated, they're not going to have the same kind of awareness on a day that they're fresh, that everything's firing, that they're well rested. And this doesn't have to be just coming off travel. Even in the case of like, okay, you have 3 lower sessions a week and you go into that second one, you're like, I'm still not recovered. Like in the case of substituting out, okay, well, I am not going to be able to send it on like a leg press or something that is, heavily externally braced. Would it really make sense to swap that out and modify your program by then making the substitution with something that has a high degree of stability needs for it to be executed properly, for you to be able to load the muscle? The stability is going to be the biggest constraint. No. So that's where I think like in this essence of like, hey, I need to make adjustments because maybe the machine isn't available. Maybe I went at a time where the gym is crowded, or just in the intrinsic sense, like, hey, I came back from a session and because I know I'm not going to be able to lift the same weight, I'd rather just go to a completely different movement entirely. Well, sure, maybe it does make sense to go to a different movement, but there needs to be thought along the ridge of whether or not that movement is going to allow you to effectively load the muscle. And what I see oftentimes is those substitutions, they're not made with a lot of rationale.